Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, April 9th, 2020. This is our 6th Open Forum Q&A webinar, part of a series ARVC is hosting and a chance for you to get all your questions answered by our panel of industry experts. As people are joining in, number is climbing here, but as people hop on, I want to start by reminding everyone about our information hub at arvc.org/coronavirus. We've been talking about this on every webinar, but I can't stress enough that this is a great resource. If you don't get your question answered on this webinar, or if you're looking for another resource about advocacy or an SBA loan that you're applying for, PPP loans, other resources are on there that will help you get through this crisis, and we update that multiple times each day with new resources. As a matter of fact, we posted late last night some new information on SBA loans as well as some new CDC resources as well. So, and then in addition to that, you can also download and listen to previous webinars, and under each webinar is a PDF document with questions that didn't get answered on that particular webinar and answers from this panel of experts who have taken the time outside of the webinar to answer the questions. And it's broken out by topic, so you should be able to find the answer pretty quick. But take a look at that, and if you don't find the answer to your question, ask it today, or you can email us at membership@arvc.org, and we'll get the answer to your question and post it online for everyone to see. Before I introduce everyone on today's expert panel, I'm going to once again kick it over to Jacqueline Gloria on our team to give everybody some quick instructions on how to submit questions today. Jack?
Thanks, David. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. As we go through today's call, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom center of your Zoom window. If you see a question that somebody else has already asked, but it's a topic that you're all also interested in, you can hit the like or the thumbs up icon to help float that question to the top of the list. The chat and the raise hands features have been intentionally disabled. David?
All right, thanks, Jack, and I see some questions already popping in. So with that out of the way, I want to introduce our panel again today. We've got experts in emergency planning, advocacy, marketing, insurance, legal, mental health, and business and finance. We got a full panel today. So to start off with advocacy, Jeff Sims is ARVC's Senior Director of State Relations and Program Advocacy, and has been working with legislators and lobbyists in Washington and at the state level on the industry's behalf for more than a decade. He's also, through this crisis, been working diligently with all of our state executives across the country and solo to work with local and state governments to get as much information out there to you as possible. Our business and finance expert again today is Paul Bosley, founder of Business Finance Depot. Paul started that company in 2006 and regularly volunteers with the SBA. So he is our expert on the SBA loans and PPP loans that are so popular right now. Our emergency planning expert again today is Patrick Hardy. Patrick is CEO of Hytropy.com, a leading disaster management company in the RV and campground industry, and he's also a certified emergency manager and certified risk manager. We have two insurance experts with us again today, Chris Hipple with Leavitt Insurance and Irene Jones with Marshall and Sterling. Both are 25-year veterans of the insurance business in our industry, and both have been featured speakers at numerous ARVC events. Covering marketing, we have Brian Searl and Mark Koep joining us again. Brian is the CEO of Insider Perks, full-service digital agency, providing marketing and advertising services to our industry. And Mark is a virtual entrepreneur who travels the country in his RV with his family and is the founder and CEO of campgroundviews.com. Our legal expert today is Christine Taylor. She's an attorney with Towne Ryan Partners in Albany, New York, specializing in labor and employment law. And she also has a unique perspective on our industry, having grown up in her family's campgrounds. And our mental health expert joining us again today is Jenna Smith. Jenna has a master's in social work and has been a practicing social worker for the past 16 years, specializing in anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues, which are very important to be focusing on as we get through this crisis. So welcome again to all of our panelists, and thanks for joining us today. So we're going to get started with our first question. Looks like we've got 4 questions in already. And Paul, are you on right now? I know you had a potential phone call that you needed to answer. If you're on, we'll start with an SBA question.
I'm on for now. Hopefully the phone doesn't ring in the middle. All right, go ahead.
All right. Well, let's give it a go. So this question is, I'm on the board of directors of an RV park in Nevada. We are not for profit and member owned. We're still open, and I'm looking for information on whether we are eligible for the PPP loans. And she adds here, we have not had to lay anyone off yet.
Yes, nonprofits are eligible. It's the same process for nonprofits and for profits, and I have to put myself on mute.
Okay, we'll come back because I had a follow-up question, so we'll come back.
Hello.
Patrick, this is a question for you, I think. Looking ahead to when we can begin to bring guests into the park leisurely, is there a way to determine how many guests per square foot would be recommended, for instance, in a dog park? And they're specifically saying their dog park is 1.5 acres. Is there a safe number that we can allow to add to that if our local regulator or state doesn't have a guideline? What can campgrounds use as a formula? Do you have any recommendation on that?
Right now, no. Right now, all the CDC has given is guidance, and that's really what I think should be the touchstone for those kinds of calculations. Is what they say is that as long as it's basically a 2-point calculus. First is that as long as people can stay 6 feet apart comfortably, that's the word they also use. They use the word comfortably. So as long as you can do that, and then the other thing is that it shouldn't be an activity or a place where people would be inclined to clump together as a social group. So that's one of the reasons why they've asked for beaches to be closed. And I know a couple of you guys emailed me in regards to lakes and things that you have on property. And that's one of the reasons why they've asked us to remain closed, is because there are just too many opportunities for people to gather up as a group. So for right now, that's what they have asked for. However, with the final proviso, as a matter of fact, I was on a conference call yesterday about this with Homeland Security. One of the things that they're talking about is that they know, they are almost certain that guidance is going to change, especially if the lockdowns begin to be lifted. So that's going to remain a very fluid situation. So the answer to the question I've given today probably will not apply in a month, probably won't apply in 2 months, but for right now, that's the guidance they've asked for.
Okay. A quick follow-up here. We've got a question about the Disaster Hawk app, and is there a way to print documents on that from the app?
Not yet, no. That's something that we're planning to add in about a month or so, but right now we don't have the capability of that. However, if people email us, we're happy to help provide a PDF for it.
Okay. And the next one is also for you. We've heard of I think we talked about it actually on last webinar. Someone mentioned it anyway, an industrial type of disinfectant sprayer that airlines have been using. Thinking of playgrounds and other things at a campground, whoever mentioned that before, do we know what the brand name is on that, what the device actually is, and where to find it if a campground owner is interested in purchasing something like that?
That's something I'm happy to find for you. I actually have heard of that, and before I blurt out a name of anything, let me get the information, and then by the end of the webinar, I'll jump in when I'm asked another question. I'll jump in about this. However, the one thing I am going to say is I would like to give a general caution to everyone, is that even though these disinfectants do exist, be aware that the guidance still has not changed on opening these communal areas. They do not want these communal areas open. So what I don't want to have happening is I don't want people to say, well, there's a disinfectant for that, so you know what, we're good, so we can open all these areas again. The answer is an unequivocal no, you may not, because they do not want too many people in an uncontrolled social area. And the fact of the matter is that you guys can't disinfect it often enough, because if kids are on the playground and there's going to be sort of that continual stream of people on the playgrounds, there's going to be a very strong possibility of interpersonal engagement and transmission. So, and I'm happy to provide that to everybody, but just be aware that the guidance from the CDC has not changed. I've been following the guidance almost daily on this. And so I just want to generally caution you against that. And I also want to caution you on a perception issue, because again, if this is, even though these things exist, if that is seen, you have to think in your mind, how is that going to look to a public that is already hyped up with tremendous amount of hysteria? How is that going to look with the news media? How is that going to look with the regulators, who some counties really want to close down the campgrounds? So just please be aware that even though these things do exist, I would strongly caution you on this, that reopening those parts of the park are really, I would say it's strongly contraindicated, because you just don't want to put yourself and other campgrounds in the area in a tough position, especially if you reopen them and then later on you have an outbreak. But I will be happy to get that for you, and I will have it by the end of the webinar.
When I hear the phrase, be careful how it will look, I think of marketing and advocacy, and the experts on our panel may have something to add to that, maybe not, but I want to open it up to Jeff and Mark and Brian in case you do. And if I hear silence,
I guess Mark,
I'll move on.
No, Mark will jump in here.
Okay.
You got me? Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
So from a marketing standpoint, what I'm looking at, the big thing I'm looking at is where is the consumer at right now? What are they thinking? And there was actually a story out of Wisconsin. There was another one out of California, and there was another one out of New York, and an anecdotal one out of South Carolina, where neighbors of RV parks see RVs pull into those parks without a state plate. They immediately call either the local police or sheriff department or the local health department and are reporting these campgrounds as allowing people to come in for recreational purposes. And so inevitably, and we saw the article out of California, there was one out of Wisconsin, and then the anecdotal one out of South Carolina, where the health department or the sheriff's department actually went to those parks and started knocking on people's doors to essentially check their papers. And I threw air quotes around that statement. That's negative press, because you basically have neighbors that are snitching on you because they think you're doing things wrong. So the only thing you can do to counteract that is to not do things wrong. So if you're taking all the appropriate precautions, your defense is simply that. Nope, this person's a full-time RVer. They've been here for a month and a half. They're not going anywhere. All of our public areas are closed. If you've taken all those steps, you've taken away any ammunition that the actual authorities have to potentially shut down your park. That's where we are at right now. How are things going to look on May 1st? I don't know, and Patrick doesn't know. Nobody knows where things will be on May 1st. So this conversation may change by then. But for now, I would recommend that you close your public areas and take any and all precautions to avoid looking like you are a potential source of spreading of the virus.
Brian and Jeff, do either of you have anything to add to that before we move on?
I'll let Brian jump in there, and then I will.
How do you know I have something to say, Jeff?
Been around you a long time, my friend.
No, I just think it's the same thing that we've talked about before, just hammering home your reputation and how things look to other people. So we continue to see reviews come in where people are just like Mark said, to a certain extent, judging you based on not having context into what's actually going on because they don't know the industry or they don't know what's seasonal and what's long-term and what's short-term. And so just pay attention to the optics, because those reviews, if they come, can stick around for a long time. I don't know if I don't think we've even mentioned on the webinar, but Google actually shut off new reviews for about the last month now, I think. So you can leave a review, but Google has not been publishing them, and they have not allowed businesses to respond to them. So they just opened up responses again yesterday, and they're going to slowly open up new reviews again. But anything that's come in the current time is going to be allowed to be published. So we don't know what's sitting out there yet. Apparently they're going to filter these and moderate them to some extent, but we don't know how or what's being said. So
and those aren't visible, Brian, to the business owner, I mean?
Nope, we can't see them via the API. We can't see them on Google My Business, but they are being accepted, and Google has told us that they will be publishing them with the note that they will be moderating them. Now, I don't know if that means they're going to strip away everything that says coronavirus, or there's no guidelines on what that means, moderation. But
when those become visible and when they're posted, the reputation management tool that you've put together that we've got on the arvic.org/coronavirus will help with tracking those, though, and allowing the campground owners to get the most accurate response out quickly?
Yes, it should. I mean, it should. Everything we know of how Google posts and responds, they should come flooding in, and they should be reported as far as the tool goes, so people can pay attention to what's being said. Yes. And
that's an important thing to remember in terms of being able to track those reviews as they come in, especially if they're negative or wrong, and be able to get ahead of the game, right? And be able to provide that answer of, you saw RVs coming in, but it wasn't for recreational. It was because we were housing healthcare workers on the front lines at our RV park, or whatever it might be, to be able to tell the more accurate story, right?
Yeah, I mean, be prepared with, what situations people are complaining about, because whether it's happened at your park, it's happened somewhere else that you've either heard on this webinar or read an article about, or, seen in Mark's group or whatever, right? So just be prepared with things that are coming, so you at least can have that basic response. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Are there any, getting back to Jeff, you had something I want to.
Yeah, don't forget Jeff. I know he talks too, so you got to give him his time.
Well, I was a park owner for 40 years, and I've got an opinion on everything. But the main thing that I want to convey to park owners is be smart. Treat it as though everything that you're doing is going to impact your child or family member, because we are all in this together. A key thing is when you have neighbors that want to point you out, you don't want to give the appearance of vacationing. This is a very unique time. In Vermont yesterday, I started dealing with the Attorney General's office, who is encouraging people to turn those businesses in. And in the state of Illinois, the Department of Commerce decided to interpret the governor's orders and recreation and non-essential. And they're actually having deputies show up at their park, tell them they have to close down. So everything that you do, be smart. Look at those guidelines. Listen to the people on this webinar. They're giving you good, sound, solid advice. Because what you don't want is one of those headlines.
Yeah, exactly. So we've had a couple of follow-up questions to earlier questions. The one about the disinfectant spray. Is there any? This follow-up question is: Are there any legal or insurance related concerns about using something like that? Christine or Chris or Irene, do you have any thoughts on that?
I can start with, I guess, the legal concern. Using any kind of new chemical that you hadn't used before, even outside of this whole pandemic, is usually a concern. That's where we've talked about proper training of people who are using it, proper precautions, that you aren't just using it without knowing what you're doing. This is because if you have an employee doing it, you could end up with a workers' comp issue if they were injured from it, or an OSHA violation if they weren't given the proper equipment to do it. So from a legal concern, you need to be very careful about your action for your employees' sake if you have them doing it, because you don't want to create liability for you due to one of their injuries. That's one of the biggest cautionary tales we have right now, is that we have clients that, you know, are trying to follow guidelines and use new products to be super clean, but if they had not properly taken care of making sure that their employees had the right equipment and the right training, they could open themselves up for liability if there was an injury later on. So that would be my biggest concern.
How about from an insurance perspective?
I think that she touched on the workers' comp issue. So workers' comp is if you have employees who are injured. No, so there's no, there's no exclusions on this. But it's just that the likelihood of having claims, and again, it goes back to the principle we've been talking about. Have your procedures for training and writing, document that you have the procedures, that you're applying them equally to all employees, et cetera, so that you are in compliance with what the manufacturer says and what the OSHA regulations are on it as well.
I think from a marketing standpoint too, just to put it in there, if you get past the legal and the insurance hurdles and you're comfortable using it from those standpoints, just make sure you're very careful with how you present it to the public. So we've talked a lot about posting on social and making people aware of what you're doing and how things are cleaner. But make sure that you're not saying it makes it safe or it kills the virus. Just say that this is what we're doing in an effort to make our cabins cleaner without making any kind of claim.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so this next question, I'm going to stick with Chris and Irene. This is an insurance question. And it is, as insurance rates are quoted on last year's gross sales and assumptions that this year will be the same or hopefully higher, with the government closing campgrounds down altogether or restricting what type of customers can be taken in, how will this affect our campground's current insurance rates with much less income, either in reality of expectation of much less income coming in?
Well, that's Chris. That's actually 100% true, and that's what we're dealing with on our clients. The carriers, and there are multiple carriers in this market space, are all taking individual responses on what they're going to allow in terms of reductions on this. And they'll allow some carriers allow a certain amount of reduction with documentation and a different amount without any documentation. And then it depends also on your location. For example, if you're in Alaska, basically your season is almost done because people have to book so far in advance to fly or to get there. So the other side of the coin is that in order to get a true reduction, you may need to take certain amenities and items out of service, because there are charges not just on gross receipts, but on the actual amenities that are used in there. So if you, for example, don't have a pool, you don't get charged as much as a person who has a pool, because there's less of a chance of drowning if you're out in the desert. So you're going to need to get with your agent and visit about all the different amenities and which amenities are going to be completely out of service, or if they're out of service for now. And there's a host of different reactions that the industry is doing right now to try and help their customers. So the carriers are very sensitive to the client's needs as well.
Yeah, I would reiterate that. I've been saying all along, think about what your changes are going to be, talk to your agent, and let's adjust what we can. And it is going to be on a case-by-case basis, and depends with the carriers, but try to communicate what's going on. And also think, if you're doing, the other side of that is to think if you're doing any changes, like if all of a sudden you're doing delivery from your restaurant, those types of exposure changes as well, what's happening at your park. So the pool's gone, but now we're delivering food, making sure that you have the proper coverage as well.
And to kind of get people's, I always use the term mouth set for what this is going to change on you. On average, our clients, and we have thousands of them, our clients pay their premium, and it's approximately 2/3 on property and 1/3 on general liability. So if you have a 50% reduction in general liability exposure, you might see a 1/6 reduction in premium. So it's not going to be, oh, we're going to cut the premium in half, sort of a thing.
Yeah. Before Christine has to jump off, I've got a legal question for you here, Christine. Can we get one more question in?
Sure can.
Maybe you. Okay, great. So this is if we have leases with our seasonals, these are their homes to many. Is there any reason why we can't open to just them if we have written agreements? The government is requiring all leases to stand and not allowed to kick people out or reverse their leases. What is your legal opinion on allowing them in? These leases are long-term 6-month leases that were signed last year.
So not knowing exactly what your agreement says or where you're located, I just caution this advice a bit, but first, it would depend if these are people's actual residences or if this is just their seasonal recreational campsite that they can come to. So that would be your first consideration, because those government lease requirements, again, not exactly sure where you're located, but they're generally to make sure people aren't evicted during this time and can be allowed to remain in their homes. So if it's their homes, that would be one thing. If it's not their home, I think that you would have a hard time allowing them. There would be a weird consideration depending on your agreement if this is more like a second home. For example, like those membership campgrounds that we talked about the other day, where there's an ownership piece, they haven't been able to stop people from going to their second homes generally, their real estate property. So there might be a consideration there. But generally, most people don't have leases in the traditional sense for their seasonals. And in fact, to not be in landlord-tenant law, you normally should have a license. So this is where this might be a little too specific for you personally, not knowing your municipality or your document. But I'd say if it's not their home, I know this isn't necessarily what you want to hear, but as we've discussed this morning, you probably would be hard pressed to allow them to come in if you can't prove that they had nowhere else to go. If they have a home that they're supposed to be staying at, and instead you opened up to let them, the only way I could see that work is if they were committing to staying with you for those full 6 months and weren't going back and forth between another location. If they see a lot of traffic coming and going from your campground, that is not, not just going to the grocery store type of traffic, I think that's where that concern could flag you for being closed more permanently. So I just kind of intermix all of those considerations, look at your document, look at what your specific mandate is trying to do in your municipality, and maybe consult a local attorney so you can make sure you aren't one of those people being fined or shut down.
Yeah, and that gets back to that. The last point that you mentioned gets back to the how does it look piece, right? If you got a lot of traffic coming and going, the like you said, the opportunity to be red flagged is much higher. So Christine, I know you need to jump off. I want to thanks again for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you again next Thursday.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks. Paul, are you back on by chance? I had a follow-up to an SBA question earlier that I wanted to ask. If not, we'll move to another topic. All right, doesn't sound like it. So we'll move to, this looks like a marketing question. Because we do not know when we will be able to open bathhouses, what do we tell guests who call to reserve tent sites in May or even June? Right now, we are accepting reservations after Memorial Day, but not taking deposits yet to try to avoid having to refund all the money like we did back for reservations in April. What are your thoughts on that from a marketing standpoint?
I think you just have... Go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead, Brian. You're first this time.
No, sorry. I mean, I think, again, just focusing on it being as transparent as possible. So I see a lot of parks that where you can allow RVs who are not permanent, state by state, locality by locality, of course, saying that we're only going to take the self-contained RVs, our cabins are shut down, we're not taking tents. So yes, if you're still taking reservations out for a month or two or whenever, I think you just have to set the expectations with people one of two ways, depending on what your policy is or it might be. And that is either A, we're going to have to cancel your reservation if the time comes where you're supposed to check in and we can't open our bathhouses, or B, that there's not going to be a bathhouse available if you're still going to allow them to camp. So just be as transparent as possible with them.
Yeah, and I like that policy that the question asker stated that they're doing. So the biggest thing that we have to consider as an industry is that there's an unknown for the campers right now. I'll actually share with you some numbers. We were looking at our data at campgroundviews.com, and for March, our search traffic, remember, we're used by people when they're looking to go traveling. Our search traffic was off 58% year over year for March. I've spoken to a number of the other search engines, same thing. So overall search traffic of people looking for places to go is significantly down. So when we look out to May, June, July, there's still uncertainty of whether or not people are going to be able to camp. So would this be your tent sites, this be your RV sites, whatever. You need to start thinking about how you can make it easier for people to commit to you, with the ability for them to also then cancel easily should things go longer. So that uncertainty is preventing people from even looking for places to go camping right now. And anything you can do to communicate that, yeah, we plan on opening, here's the steps we're going to take to make sure you're safe. We invite you, and you go ahead and book now. We'll refund your money, no problem, if for some reason you can't come out. Anything you can do to help people get over that uncertainty is going to help. And if you've actually got people looking for tent sites right now, that's probably a good thing. You're kind of lucky.
You think one option might be to take a reservation without any type of deposit now, and then have a policy that says we will take the deposit at a later date or something like that, so that the camper still has some skin in the game, but don't have to commit right this second?
Yeah, I'll share an idea. So Horizon Resorts, they actually are doing this, and Scott shared this kind of concept. So what they're doing with their existing, and obviously you can customize this idea, but what they're doing with existing reservations is they're actually offering to keep the deposit as a credit, but with a percent bump on that credit. So instead of the credit being worth, if the deposit's $10, instead of it being worth $10, they add a 10% bump onto it. So the credit's worth $11. So then the consumer has a choice. Oh, wow, I'm actually going to make money on this credit. I plan on coming there anyway. So they're incentivizing people to leave that money instead of pulling that money out for that deposit. So get creative with your refund policy. The reality is, what we do see is, even though people aren't looking for camping now because they're stuck at home anyways, there is this overwhelming demand to go camping once this opens up. So if you can do things that are backdating that demand and keeping that demand there for when it's ready to go, I think you'll see a nice bump when this is all over. I think overall, the consumers, our campers, the folks that stay at our parks, they're ready to go camping already. And so if you can do anything to keep them interested and involved, and even encourage them to potentially pay with a credit, you're going to get that income coming in, and we should see a benefit of this. The only reason people aren't going to go camping is if we all end up having to live in our homes forever, which we all know is not going to happen. So we're going to eventually get to a point where people can go camping again. If you can make it easy for them to go and encourage them to go, you're going to see a win.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. Jenna, I'm going to jump to you with the next question. This is a mental health question. And it's, how do we handle campers who seem to be angry at campground owners, business owners, as if it's their fault that this pandemic is going on? I'm sure that's happening a lot. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone right now is obviously more stressed than usual. And so what I would say is, first of all, you need to give everyone the benefit of the doubt and a wide berth. So a lot of cooped up time can bring out the worst in everyone. Each person is going to have moments, obviously, when they're not at their best. And so I think as campground owners, it's, knowing this about your campers, they're going to be stressed. And to remember, it's not about you. It's not about, you didn't cause this. None of us caused this. I know I've been hearing a lot, and I heard it earlier, we are all in this together. And so I just think it's really important to kind of move with grace, if you can, through these blowups. If you have someone, yelling at you or sending you a nasty email, or you're on the phone with them, that you don't need to show up to every argument that you're invited to, that you can say, I'm happy to talk with you when you're more calm. I think also to make sure you're not holding grudges, and to remember everyone's doing the best they can. But I think also you can kind of put it back on them and just kind of just listen, saying, I understand this is very stressful, and that, we're in times that we've never been in, and things are changing daily. So really, I think if you can become more of a listener and just validate, this must be really hard for you, this must be really stressful, versus getting defensive and saying, well, of course this isn't my fault, and, kind of jumping into that. But I think bottom line, just remember, we are all heightened right now. Everyone is, stressed and feeling almost the stages of grief, because our way of life is so different right now, and it is temporary. Also reminding them of that it feels like a very long temporary, but it is temporary.
I want to hit on something that you mentioned in that, Jenna, the importance of listening, because on last webinar we talked about, you gave us some tips for reflective listening as a way of working through concerns that employees have. But that tactic, that reflective listening, works in any situation, right? That someone, whether
Absolutely.
It's an employee or a customer, if they're stressed and they're coming to you, that's a good technique to use.
It absolutely is. I think the reflective listening, just a lot of people right now, I think, feel very alone and very isolated. Even though we're all going through it together, it's still a very isolating experience. And so the more you can validate, the more you can listen, and just let them know that you understand, I think can go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to jump over to an advocacy question for you, Jeff.
Okay, before you do, can I make a comment about Jenna's comments?
Sure.
She's absolutely right on, and I am receiving phone calls from consumers who are hot under the collar when they start off, and my goal is they start out calling me Mr. Sims, and at the end of it, they're talking to Jeff. And you have to listen to them. They're frustrated, and it's real easy to be short. But the reality is I want to make sure I talk them down. And the way I've been doing that is saying, I absolutely understand this. And the reality is, because they're really mad at the campground owner. And I said, but you shouldn't be, because the reality is that campground owner would love to have you in there. They want to generate revenue. So, but I would never encourage a campground owner to go against a executive order. To the contrary, because of the exposure and the liability and potential penalties, and just remind them, this is not forever. It's a period of time. We don't know how long, but we will get through it. And just the manner of tone that you take with them. And I have a lot of them say, I can't believe you answered your phone. Well, yeah, I answered my phone. And if I didn't, it was because I was on the phone. So, but just be kind. Be kind to each other.
That's an important aspect of it to start off with, for sure. This question, Jeff, for you on the advocacy front, it looks like it's coming from Ohio specifically. but I think it translates to other states dealing with the same thing. And it basically is talking about many of these executive orders mention hotels and motels specifically. Some of them don't mention RV parks and campgrounds specifically. But the ones that mention hotels and motels in some cases are allowing those to stay open, but have mandated campgrounds to close with the exception of residents or stays over a certain number of days, whatever it might be. And this owner is asking basically that seems kind of counterintuitive, since social distancing and sanitation and whatnot at a campground would be seemingly easier, better than, you know, meeting someone in a hotel elevator or hallway or something like that. What are you seeing out there with the states that you're working in, and what advice could you give the owners who are in states that have executive orders like that?
Well, first of all, I absolutely understand what they're talking about, and I'll have to preface that with we understand our industry, and what makes common sense to us. You trying to put the word common sense and government in the same sentence, and what's wrong with that? You know, so we have to educate, and in the, we'll call it the 40,000 foot level, if we were flying today, which we're not, but we're looking, and we've been working on the national level and encouraging all members to participate in the RV Action Alert. But with the Department of Homeland Security, because under the CISA, and if you don't know what that means, I have to look at it every time, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, most executive orders come from that. And they've just copied and pasted them, and hotels and motels are included in that. And so eventually—
As necessary infrastructure?
Pardon?
Right, as necessary infrastructure?
That's correct.
That's what you're
referencing,
correct. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
They've already, and that's where the governors are referring to and copying and pasting those. And some of them have elected to remove hotels and motels. So if I would sit here and start going through this, I'm talking to the choir here. We all know that recreational vehicles, why they are self-contained. So there's a good definition. And the original social distancing element of our industry. So we are in a prime position for people to social distance. They have their own unit and are only dealing with theirs, as opposed to a hotel where you're walking down a hallway, you're pushing an elevator button and all that. That's common sense to us, not necessarily to government officials. They are seen from the recreation standpoint. And like I stated earlier, you want to make sure that the perception is that this isn't vacationing. And we are prime areas for health workers, first responders. I'm seeing it routinely. I even have one in a site here where I had some full hookups available to let a nurse self-quarantine because she didn't want to expose her family. We are positioned as an industry to be a great alternative. And you can't use the word safety, but I certainly think it reduces the risk. And Chris or Irene could probably, expound on that. But what you're doing—
Jeff, you mentioned—
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, what's happening here is you have the opportunity to accommodate the full-timer, which has been a big concern because that is their primary residence. So most of these orders do allow for, if that is considered your primary residence. then you can, and you have no other place to go. Several states, that once you arrive, you've got to quarantine for 14 days. If you can, and your executive orders allow that, then by all means. There's some parks that are not even opening because they don't want to deal with it at all. But there will be an end date, and at the end of this, I would tell you right now, we're all focused on what's happening right at this given minute. But you, for your own personal business, I'm going to recommend that you start spending your energies thinking about day 2. What are you going to do when this ends? What is your plan? You've got time to think about it. So whatever that date is, and Mark talked about, none of us know that. We don't know what that date is, but it will be out there. It is out there. I don't know when it is, but start making your plan so that you know on the end of this what your plan is.
Jeff, my follow-up question I wanted to ask was, you mentioned the RV Act and the grassroots effort that you've been doing, and you used a couple of different times used the word we have to educate these government officials. Talk a little bit more about what you and ARVC and other industry associations like RVIA, RVDA, what the industry is doing on that front to educate.
Yeah, David and I work very closely with RVIA and RVDA, and from the manufacturers, the dealers, and the campgrounds, we in our coalition have come together and have the RV Action Center. It's called RV Act, and they were gracious in assisting us with, they have one for campgrounds. And David was actually successful in working with RVIA to get a state-specific letter that goes out. And it's what it does for you is you don't have to look up and say, okay, who is my representative? What district am I in? A lot of people, unfortunately, don't know that. And so that is a form you put in your name and your address and go down and your zip code specifically. And one push of the button, it goes to all of your elected officials. And it makes the case for why, in this question, why RV parks and campgrounds should be considered essential businesses. And we can have that customized for any state. And had a conversation with RVIA yesterday, and we're working with multiple states right now. Virginia was able to customize theirs. And David, I don't remember the exact figures that I said yesterday, but it was over 6,000 letters had already been sent out in Virginia.
Yeah, it was 6,800, I think. And that was actually a couple of days ago. So it's probably well above that now, but that's just in one state.
So this is how you educate and that's just the first step. It's not like, okay, I push send and I'm done. I've done my part. Now the work begins. You need to get on the phone. You need to email personally. You need to make contact with your elected officials and make those same cases. And in our coronavirus portion of ARVC, there's information there that you can use. And you can certainly contact me if you need some specific help. But we're faced with a situation it's like, I was a park owner for 40 years, and you get a group of park owners together, and what's the first thing they say? Yeah, but mine's a little different, right? I mean, we've all been there. We all say that. Well, in the states with this, every state's a little different. We have some states that don't allow local jurisdictions to make more restrictive requirements. And then some states, it's all over the board. It could be different for a particular municipality in a specific county. So we're faced with, this is all over the board. And I think that ultimately the answer will be getting RV parks and campgrounds listed on the CISA list of essential businesses. We're not there yet, but you can do your part by getting on that action alert and participating.
Well, and just to follow up before we move on to the next question is that I've heard Jeff say this many times to a lot of people, that the advocacy work that ARVC is doing and other groups in the industry are doing are great, but when it comes down to it, the best advocacy work is when a government official hears from a voter that's in their district or in their state. So getting involved with that RV Act is an important piece.
Say,
Go
David,
ahead, whoever that was.
This is Chris. My background, actually, my family owned the newspaper in the capital of South Dakota for over 100 years. And I'd echo what Jeff says about the advocacy of the owners individually, the voters individually. But you also need to remember it needs to be continuous, because those people roll in and out of office on a regular basis. So it's not a do it once and stop deal.
Right.
Yep. That's what keeps job security for you, right? Right, Jeff?
I don't know.
This is an ongoing thing. The issue
see how this all turns out.
Well, there's always a new issue, right?
It never ceases to amaze me, and I never say what's next, because there's always a what's next, and. And I know specifically on legislation, and I think I've already reviewed over 4,500 pieces of legislation this year in the middle of all of this. And when I read something and I think, oh my goodness, you got to be kidding me, that's my red flag that says, yep, we've got some educating to do.
Yeah. David, I just want to jump in here from a marketing standpoint real quick before you move on. And just what Jeff said about preparing for when this is over is super critical for the future of your business, and from a marketing standpoint especially. So we know certain things already. We know that April is probably shot for a lot of parks. So what you should be doing in your downtime is figuring out your financial situation, figuring out, okay, now that my season's shortened, what kind of guests and traffic and occupancy do I need to have to make sure that I'm still set up for when the floodgates open? And then figure out how you're going to adjust your marketing efforts to be ready for that. How you're going to allocate more money or different places, or, run Facebook ads where you haven't run it before, and just have a plan. So when, as Jeff said, this opens up, you are able to recover as much as possible. No one's going to fully recover, but you're able to recover as much as possible. And the only way to do that is to have a plan in place and understand your specific park and your situation.
And something else that I've been thinking about years through the years, conveying to campground operators, your competition is not the park across the street from you. Your competition is other forms of recreation, such as cruise lines, air travel. I think we're going to see a pretty significant reduction in those. And I think that the RV park and campground industry is poised to do extremely well when we get to that day too, which we don't know what that day is, but I think people need to recreate and all that, but I rather suspect that those other forms of recreation will, unfortunately, they're going to hurt pretty bad. But the RV parking industry, campground industry, is poised to do well when we get beyond this point. That's just what I want to say about that.
All right.
Sorry.
Paul, no, that's okay. Paul, are you back on by chance? I want to jump back to an SBA follow-up question if you are.
Yeah, I'm back.
All right. So the follow-up question was around the loan. The original question that we asked about nonprofits being included in these loans. The understanding from this question is that 501c3 nonprofits are eligible for the current stimulus, but 501c6 nonprofits are not eligible for certain aspects. Are you understanding that to be the case?
I think you've got me stumped for the first.
Okay.
That's
okay. We can.
Yeah, I think everything. My recommendation would be to go on to the SBA and or the Treasury website and research that, because I don't feel right to answer that question, so because I don't know.
I actually think, now that we're talking about it, I actually think that this question is answered on a document that we have, a resource that we have on arvic.org/coronavirus as well. So I will make sure that that is the case, and for the person who answered or who asked that question, we'll make sure that you get that answer. But if memory serves, and I'll confirm this, if memory serves, I think that that 501c6s are able to access a couple of things, but for the most part, like the PPP loan is not available to 501c6s, if I'm remembering correctly.
You're correct.
We'll get that
David.
answer though and post
You're correct. I just Googled it.
Okay.
Yeah, for the
Okay,
PPP
cool.
specifically, what you said is true. And that's Diana, the leader of the association in California. So I think she was just talking about maybe California specifically.
Yeah, and many state associations are 501c6s, so that's top on her radar. Many of our state associations in the same boat, so it's that's an important thing. And one of the things that that I'll also follow up with on is there's a association of associations out there called ASAE. ARVC is a member of that group, and one of the things that has been done in the last safely, I'll say the last week, but I think it was less than that, was a lot of advocacy work going to the federal government to get 501c6 organizations included in the next round of stimulus. And there was a letter, for instance, sent to Speaker Pelosi and a number of other leaders in Washington advocating for that. And it was signed by ARVC and 3,000 other associations. And that's similar to the RV Act that Jeff was talking about. There's a link that we can put up on arvic.org/coronavirus as well, that allows you to sign on to that same letter in a similar way. So I'll make sure that gets out there as well. Okay, jumping over to emergency management. We've talked a little bit in the past about the closing of various amenities and how to communicate that. This particular question has to do with a dock on a lake at this campground, which I'm sure lots of campgrounds have. And the question specifically is, this dock, does it have to be closed, Patrick, completely, or are there ways of keeping that open? And if either way, open or closed, how would you recommend communicating that to the person who might be needing to use that dock? Maybe they're bringing in their own boat and need a place to get out onto the lake, but the docking area is on the campground's property. What's your thought there?
Well, I'm happy to answer that question, and I'm going to do that. And then after that, I'll also answer the question, because I got an answer on the question regarding the sanitation, so supplies and the chemical that the airlines are using. So I got both those answers for you. So we'll start first in regards to the dock. Before I give a specific answer, I want you to think in your mind about your park, and I want you to think about what you can enforce. So that's really important to realize, because I think what has been a touchdown on things that Jeff has talked about, Brian's talked about, Mark has talked about, and even what Chris was talking about, is that it's a perception issue. So make sure that whatever policy you decide to implement based upon what I say, or based upon what you hear today, or based upon if you're hearing this as a recording, whatever, I want you to think about whether or not you can enforce whatever the policy is, because we actually got a lot of questions on this after the last webinar, and about 10 of you emailed me about this too. So here's my thought about it. In general, I think that the dock areas should probably be closed. And I know that's going to sound a little strange, but there are dock sites where I've been to parks before in California, where there were, the park was rather large, and there were a lot of different areas where people wanted to go on the lake. They wanted to go fishing in one area, and so what ended up happening was I would go down to dock sites, and they were incredibly busy places. And I was a lifeguard on one of the busiest beaches in the United States, and that dock I thought was crazy, but it was nothing compared to some of the things that I saw on these small docks. People doing boat launches, or they were pulling line, or they were doing whatever, and it creates an issue of crowds. And again, for right now, I know this sounds very draconian, but we have to maintain social distancing. In fact, for those of you who were looking yesterday in the news, one of the things that came out of President Trump's news conference was, and this was from the CDC and from the World Health Organization, that the reason why they're not seeing a lot of new cases in COVID is because of social distancing. So I just want to reemphasize that. So more specifically, if you feel like the docks have to be, or if you say, look, I really want to reopen the dock, it's really important to me, I think that's fine. But if you're going to do that, do you have to commit staff to enforcing the rules? Yes, you have to do that. Do you have to make sure that you are putting up signage that says, if you are violating the rules, we're going to close the docks? Yes, you do, because that's one of the things that people have to recognize, that where people see going to the dock or doing or being enjoying a certain amenity, they see that as a right. They say, well, listen, I'm paying to be here, therefore I have the right to use this, and this. And if you close it, you have to justify that to me, and that's not the case. That is not the case, and you have to communicate that very clearly, that this is a privilege, that if you open something, that is a privilege for them to use, and if they abuse that privilege, you pull it away. And you say, listen, people are not following the rules appropriately, and so we have to pull back. So but the one thing I will say is that when you are doing your normal patrols, looking around, which is what I've said you really need to be doing to make sure you're enforcing the rules regarding the amenities, you have to add the dock sites as well. So you have to be watching folks. If you're going to have an active dock site, you're probably going to have a staff member out there, especially if there's a lot of launches going out. I know a park out in California, they're about 300 acres there, and they have a massive dock site. And there's enough people there where I was talking to them saying you're probably going to have someone out here almost full time, because there's too much potential for abuse, and there's too much of a potential of violating the public health orders. And I know that sounds very much like you have to be a police officer and all that. And I don't want you folks to feel like that. And in fact, I'm going to go back to something that Jenna was talking about, as well as Jeff, which is, if you are always perceived as being a police officer, you're always perceived as having to enforce things, that is going to make the customer service experience immensely harder to do, because people are going to now see you less as someone who's trying to accommodate them versus someone who is trying to restrict things. So that's why, in general, what I say is nip it in the bud and just say to people, look, it's closed for right now. We don't want it to be this way. Trust me, I don't want it to be this way, but it has to be like that until the CDC says that we're okay to reopen it, or county public health, or whatever. And if you create that uniformity of application, then what happens is that people don't see you always as a cop. They just say, look, they recognize this is closed. Otherwise, you have a dock site, you're going to have to be out there all the time. You're going to have to be interacting with people constantly. So think about that as well. But in general, that's why I think that docks and boatlets and things are generally problematic. Let me talk to you about the supplies. Okay, so essentially the airlines are using a couple of different chemicals, of which I do a lot of work in healthcare. I work with about 1,400 nursing homes, and you can imagine the chaos going on over there. But they use certain chemicals that are EPA hospital-grade disinfectants. And those ones are used and applied to specific surfaces after certain uses, right? So it's usually single use. So if you think about it on an airline, you have a bunch of people who are crammed into an aircraft. After everyone leaves and they leave the aircraft, then they're able to disinfect all the surfaces using some chemical, and I'll talk to you about what those are in a moment. And then they have people come back on. Again, the seat is single use. So it isn't like people are constantly on and off the airplane. They're able to disinfect everything on those surfaces before they're reused. And right now, I know that a couple of people are going to be asking me, well, can't I just then use the chemicals you're about to talk to me about on playground equipment? The answer is no, because the playground equipment is constantly used. So one child is touching it, then another one is, before you have a chance to clean them. So I'm going to give you a few chemical names of things and products that I have seen, one of which I know the airlines is using is a disinfectant called VeraClean, VIRACLEAN. So VeraClean has been used, and I've used VeraClean when I was a hazmat guy. I've heard of VeraClean before. They have, it's something you can actually place on surfaces. It's something that's used with COVID. There are other ones called Virox. Virox I've seen used, and that's generally used in hospitals. A couple of airlines are using one called MD-125, MD-125. That one, I don't know if that's rated against COVID or not. I haven't had a chance to look at that. But those ones are used with foggers. And then there's another fogging chemical called Calla 1452. That's CALLA 1452. But if you're going to use those, let me sort of give a general disclaimer, because I've either heard of or I've actually seen used a lot of these. You actually have to have equipment to go with the stuff. So you actually have to have a fogger. So that obviously is contraindicated if you're trying to sanitize something outdoors. The other issue with them too is that people have to be trained how to use these chemicals. So one of the things I'm going to say is, if you decide to buy any of these, that's fine, but you have to give your staff specific instructions. Don't simply say, hey, look at the label and follow it. That's not enough. That is not acceptable. What you need to do is you need to literally go through the instructions of how to use these. How often should they be used? You need to sit down with your staff and go through it and say, listen, we're using Virox. Here's how often we need to use it. Do this, 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 and this. And don't do anything other than what's written on the label. So do everything that is specific to what that label says, and don't assume that all the labels are the same. So if you're using one chemical or the other, those are things that you have to make sure you're following the label specifically. So if you're prepared to train people on it, all that, it's fine. The last thing that I will say is be aware of this, is that a lot of these cleaners are wonderful and great, but be aware that the healthcare industry needs them. They need them now. So if you're going to use them, we ask that you try not to buy too many bottles of them, because healthcare companies are going to need to have them. And in fact, I know in healthcare, specifically in senior care, and you guys have heard there was a nursing home this morning, people left. They had to evacuate the entire nursing home because staff refused to show up. Literally, staff refused to show up because they said they were worried about people getting infected, so they just left. People just abandoned their posts. So that's part of the issue, is that they don't have enough supplies for things. So really, again, I can't emphasize this enough. In your disaster plans, whether you use mine or yours, whatever, you need to decide on paper what you're going to use, how often you're going to use it, and really think about whether or not you need that or not. Because if you don't need it, don't use it until we have enough supplies for a backup. So I know that was an extended answer, but I hope that answers everyone's question, and I'm happy to answer any follow-ups later on. Go ahead, David.
That last point is a good point, though. You need to keep in mind that the first responders are going to be first in line for a lot of these supplies. So the next question is, and we've got a good number of questions to get through in the last 20 minutes here, so I want to be conscious of that as we're getting through these next questions. We'll look for answers. Let's do a lightning round, if we will, here for the next 20 minutes, and do 30-second answers so we can get through as many of these questions as we can. Paul, this next one is for you. It's an SBA question. They're looking for clarity on what makes one LLC a small business and another LLC not a small business, but considered as self-employed is the question. Can you help clarify that?
The only regulation I've seen is 500 or more employees.
Regardless of the setup of the business?
Yeah, it's irrelevant.
Okay. Okay.
I think, David, sorry.
Actually, I'll jump in. No, there are single member LLCs versus like a more of a standard LLC that has multiple entities in it. So it depends on how you're taxed at the end of your day. So if you're Schedule C, like a single member LLC versus something else, so I would recommend that they speak to their tax professional on that.
Yeah, the answer I was just providing is related to the PPP loan. That's all. I wasn't talking about the legal setup. I'm just talking about the loan.
So in terms of getting the PPP loan, as long as their campground has fewer than 500 employees, doesn't matter the setup.
That's correct. Yeah, it's open to every type of business, whether they're a sole prop, LLC, C Corp, doesn't matter. It's 500 or less.
And a follow-up to that, the resource that we have on arvic.org/coronavirus currently about how to apply for the PPP loan. Do you know if that process, since we uploaded that, has changed? I had a question come in via email that the screen captures that are in that resource don't look like the current version of the application process. Do you know if that's changed?
Well, I could tell you on a personal level, the information I got initially from the Treasury Department had an application that was downloaded. And when I went into, I'm a BBB or Bank America customer, and they sent out the information, the application online to BBB customers. It was a week ago, not this past weekend, but the weekend before. And the application that I filled out was identical to that. They had some additional questions that were more related to, my relationship with Bank America. But so far, I haven't seen anything that's significantly different.
And then just to clarify as well, once the application is submitted, the campground will get a confirmation number, and that's basically the tracking, if you will, of where their application is in the process, right? Because as you, I think, told me the other day on the phone, the SBA is not picking up the phone right now. They're so inundated with stuff. You can't call and say, hey, what's the status of my application? You got to go back online, is that right? And use that number to track where your application is in the process?
Well, you got two different loans. With the EIDL, that goes directly to the SBA, and the only thing I got back is I applied for that the week before the PPP, and I just got a confirmation email back from the SBA saying they've received my application. That was like 3 weeks ago, and I haven't heard anything since. In regards to the PPP, the information that I got back was just a confirmation, again, that they received it. And then about 3 days ago, I received an email saying that I have access to their online portal, and this is what they need me to upload. And I uploaded everything, and I haven't heard anything since. In our website, we have a link to a national lender that's accepting applications from anyone. And I have clients that have done that aren't via Bank America customers, and they told me the same exact thing, that they got an email back from New Tech and they just had to upload documents. And I heard from a number of banks within the last 24 hours that the SBA has finally released the closing document procedure. So that it's expected to begin funding, I'm going to say within the next 24 to 48 hours.
Okay. And all of those links that Paul just mentioned are on arvic.org/coronavirus as well. All right, jumping over to marketing again. This question has to do with communication. We talked a little bit about planning ahead for when the open when the gates open up again. This question specifically is around Memorial Day coming up and how parks should be planning for this, but I don't think it really matters the holiday. Talk a little bit more from a marketing perspective again about what parks should be doing now to prepare for that day, that opening day. Brian, why don't you go first?
So I think that we've talked multiple times about being as transparent as possible and making people as comfortable as possible. Now, again, we're assuming that, I see no reason not to believe this, that parks will be open for Memorial Day. So let's assume that just for the purposes of our answer. Leading up to that, be as transparent as possible and make people feel as safe as possible in that, here's how I clean my cabins, here's how I'm social distancing, here's what's open, here's what's not, here's how I'm cleaning my public facilities that are open, those kinds of things. But beyond that, just understanding the consumer, what's going to make them keep their booking if it's refundable booking, and what's going to make them continue to book as we lead up to Memorial Day, or even, like you said, David, it's not necessarily the holiday, but leading past the holiday to weekends and to July 4th and to things like that. And so that, David, you had a good point. Maybe, I think it was you who said it, waive your cancellation fees or don't even take deposits. Sorry, not waive your cancellation fees. I think you said don't take deposits in the beginning to make people feel more comfortable. So just think outside the box, and some of these policies that you've had for a while will work again one day and may still work now, but there may be policies that in the short term could work better to help you encourage more people to book and to not cancel, but to maybe reschedule so that you're better set up for when the doors do open again, whenever that may be.
Agreed.
All right. The next couple of questions are emergency planning specific. This first one, we have a wooden picnic table at each site. Should we be disinfecting them, or should that be the camper's responsibility? We have 300 sites, though it's not all filled at this time. So it sounds like maybe there's a question there of whether or not they have the staff to go around and disinfect each one of these picnic tables. What would you say to that, Patrick?
Discontinued their use for right now. One of the things that, and I know that's going to sound silly because if you were going to say, well, how am I going to enforce that? Well, you probably can't. So that's the general proviso that I would give you. But one of the things that, and I don't want to keep saying close this, close that, but one of the issues is that right now, regardless of what you've read online, regardless of what you've seen in other places, there really isn't a well-known way to disinfect and sanitize equipment outside. So we really, for COVID, now for other things, that's different, but for COVID, right now, we just don't have anything. There's some guidance, there's some things that some companies are doing, but, and I keep an eye on this because when I start to find out additional updates and things, I will keep you guys updated on stuff. But the reason is for the exact, the reason that, that David was talking about here is the exact issue here, because you can't, and you don't have the staff to go to every picnic table, you don't know how often it's being disinfected and sanitized. You just need to tell people when they come in, hey, listen, we're asking you to not use the tables. As a matter of fact, I was actually, just when COVID was starting, I was over on the East Coast. I went to a bookstore, and the bookstore had, they had chairs everywhere where people could play chess and different stuff. It was a really big bookstore. They literally had a sign on every table, and the chairs were flipped upside down, and they actually said, because of COVID, because of this, the state of Pennsylvania has asked that we close this area, so please do not use it. And that was sort of integral to that business, but they realized it just wasn't worth the risk, and they don't, frankly, have the staff to go. And that particular bookstore was 3 stories high, so they don't have the staff to go up and down each part of the store. So for right now, again, this probably won't last forever. That's my guess, is it probably won't last more than a month or so. My feeling is that they'll start to come out with some guidance, but for right now, let's go ahead and restrict that a little bit, and then we can come back in and talk about it again in a couple of weeks.
So the smartest thing, it sounds like, would be to just remove the picnic table from the sites if possible. That's not going to be possible for everybody, but
if you can, yeah,
so absolutely. Remove the opportunity to use it. Another quick question about concerning the 12 people recommendation 10 people recommendation. This questioner has seen the term, quote, living unit defined as a family member currently living in the same, family members currently living in the same quarters. And they're wondering if you can confirm that and advise on how that would translate to campgrounds specific. If they have a cabin, for instance, we talked about that, I think, last webinar about a cabin that holds more than 10 people, how you would even confirm that all 10 people are part of the same family unit. Kind of difficult.
Simple answer?
Right?
Simple answer is you can't. There is no way of doing that.
Yeah.
There just isn't a way of doing it.
You close the cabin as an option
Yes.
at that point, like we mentioned last time. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because that's not fair to you to have to do that. So yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and this next question is it's describing themselves as a private campground that is currently shut down, and they have memberships, and they're wanting to know what your thoughts are on allowing limited access for, let's say, 1 or 2 days during a specific time frame to allow those members to come in, get to their sites, remove items that they might need, that kind of thing. Are you seeing any issue with that? As long as
I'm sorry, David, could you say it again? It broke up there a little bit. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? Go ahead.
Private campground that's currently shut down and has memberships, and they're wanting to know if there's a possibility to allow those memberships or those members into the park for a limited amount of time to get personal belongings and that kind of stuff that they need to get out. Is that?
I think that's
a
fine.
Locality issue too.
It is. You're absolutely right. I was going to say it's probably fine. But what you need to do is that before you do anything, I want you to to the campground, I want you to do 3 things. Number 1, I want you to check the CDC's website, which as far as I know, they haven't given any guidance on that, so that's easy. Second, you need to go to your state if that's applicable, and you need to see what they say about it. Then third, you need to go to your county and see what they say about it. If they don't say anything about it at all, and as a matter of fact, a lot of counties have said, well, it's based on your best judgment. Well, that's fine. And so what you can do is that my feeling is, again, I can't speak for your specific county or your specific state, but what I will say is that if you let them in, you have to check them in and check them out. So if they go in and you say, okay, I'm allowing you to pick stuff up and take all that, that's fine. But then you have to make sure that you have a checkout procedure as well, because if you're not enforcing these rules, because I know a lot of campgrounds who say, well, I trust these people, I know these folks, I've known them for generations, I've known yada, that's fine, but you still got to check them in, you still got to check them out, because you don't want to be violating rules. And I will say this because one of the things that some counties have allowed RV parks to operate and campgrounds as well, even though they are very reluctant to do so, and they would look for an excuse for a violation of the rules for them to be able to justify and say, you know what, we're going to close you. And that means we're going to close everyone else in the county as well. So as long as you do those first 3 things, you look at the CDC, the state, and the county. If they don't say anything, allow people to go in, but then again, check them out as they leave so that you're very clear as to who's in the park.
Okay. All right, and with that, we're nearing the end of our time. We've, in the last couple of webinars, done a kind of round robin around the table of panelists, and I know we're minus our legal panelist and our mental health panelists who had to jump off. But for those of you who have remained, are you anything that you're running across, talking with your clients, topics that are hot right now that we haven't covered that you want to touch on before we wrap up? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, this is Mark. So the biggest thing that I see, and this kind of goes over to Jeff's area too, is the inconsistent nature of the rules that we're seeing across the country and within specific states. It's something that as an industry we're going to be facing as things start to open up, where one county is open and the one next door is not, and how we police that and interact with that. I don't have an answer to it. It's just something that I'm seeing right now, and it's going to impact us as we start to open back up.
Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's just so all over the board. And I was thinking about Patrick's comments about checking with the various local authorities having jurisdiction, and follow whatever the guidelines in. Actually, I'm kind of in utopia at the moment. I was muted and I had a phone call from somebody I recognized that I needed to take, and I can't. I have to keep it under wraps right at the moment, but just got some good news out of one governor's office. So, we keep plugging away, and once in a while we're making some headway and winning. So you can look forward to that announcement here before very long.
Excellent.
I'm feeling good.
All right, David, that's a good way to close out the call. Anybody else?
I feel good at the moment, but I want to see
David,
it in writing. I want to see it in writing.
David, I have a question. Do you plan on continuing the webinar series into next week?
As of right now, we will not have a webinar on Monday because of the Easter holiday, and as of right now, the webinar on Thursday, a week from today, is scheduled to be our last webinar. We're working with our team internally and the panelists to come up with ways going forward that we can get open questions answered and continue those questions coming in and getting answers though. So while it may not be a webinar format like this, we'll still be here obviously to answer questions, but we'll be updating everyone who has registered in terms of how that process is going to look going forward.
All right, so there will be one on a week from today?
Yes.
Okay.
April 16th.
And David, can you tell people that want to how to access the RV Action Alert?
The best way to do it is to reach out to us directly. It's not a link that we have currently on the arvic.org/coronavirus, largely because, as we've talked about many times, every state is different, every municipality is different, and rightly so, a lot of states want to be able to customize that message and be able to send it out when it actually needs to go out. We have certain states that already have campgrounds listed as essential businesses, for instance. Pennsylvania is one, and a number of others that, while advocating on a regular basis is important, currently that message that's in that particular letter is not relevant. So it's not a link that we have out there publicly, but if it's something that you are interested in participating in, reach out to Jeff through Advocacy at arvic.org. You can reach out to me directly as well. Either one of us can share the link with you. Depending on the state that you're in, though, we'll have potentially a different directive for you.
Yeah, we want them to work with.
Ask you to reach out to your state executive in a particular state and that kind of thing. So it depends entirely on where you're located. Although he did, as he mentioned earlier, Virginia, if you're in Virginia, they already have a state-specific letter that can be sent out. That's one example. So just reach out to us if that's something that you're interested in doing. Anybody else before we wrap up?
One thing I'd like to add is this. Oh, I'm sorry, Irene. So why don't you go ahead and go first?
No, please go ahead. No, you go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say was something I was on an emergency management call yesterday, which is one of the things that people are forgetting is that we are also coming into hurricane season pretty soon. We're also going into spring storms. We already had a number of flood warnings out in California. There is expected to be a good hurricane season this year. There is no high pressure system that is off the coast of Florida anymore. So there is a possibility that we could have some hurricanes. So for those of you who are in the South, I know that we're preparing for COVID, but you need to prepare also for hurricanes. So do not forget that in the midst of all this, don't forget that stuff. For those of you folks in California, we got some nice rains last weekend, but however, we are still expecting a good wildfire season this year. We're expecting at least 5 flare-ups, I think that they were saying. So
Yeah, that's good.
The point being is make sure that even though you are planning for COVID, make sure you are having your disaster plans ready to go for other things, because if you end up being an evacuation site during a COVID response, there will be specific guidance on that. So if you want to end up doing that, that is going to require planning. Again, don't try to do this off the top of your head. And the last thing that I was going to say also is, keep an eye out for changes in the way that these disasters are beginning to come. So obviously the weather patterns are changing a little bit. So hurricanes will begin, as I said, we're seeing them occur a little bit earlier in the year, late July. So just please be aware of that. Keep your plans going and be prepared for a dual disaster. So if you have a COVID response, don't be surprised. There's COVID and a hurricane. That's it.
Yeah, and storms in the Midwest that we're seeing as well. Doesn't really matter where you live. There's always going to be weather occurrences. Irene, what do you have for us?
I just wanted to jump in and let people know that we, Marshall and Sterling, created a campground evaluation tool that helps you evaluate all of the levels that you have to comply with: CDC, state, local, and your essential services order. It doesn't give you the answers, but it's designed to make it easier for you to figure out what the answers are for your specific park. We're going to make that available through ARVC. We also created a webinar that explains how to use the tool, and it really makes it a lot easier to use it. So the feedback we've gotten from people is that it's very helpful to sort through the details. And I'll tell you right now that we reference a lot of the fantastic links and resources that ARVC has created. So it's very much a partnership type of evaluation tool, but it's really designed, and it goes into a lot of things. I talked about this a little bit last week, but it's called What Does Being Open Look Like? And hopefully it will help you sort through some of the details and make a clear plan.
Excellent. Well, that's something you said, Irene, and we've all said it throughout the course of these webinars and everything, is that this whole situation has been a partnership amongst everybody on this panel and people outside of this panel and our membership and everything. We're all in this together. That's how you get through stuff like this. Okay, with that, we're at our a little over our 10:30 mark, and I want to just remind everyone that these sessions are recorded and posted. If your question didn't get answered, we'll get that answered and posted as quickly as we can. We're also going to combine those Q&A documents into one document and make it a little easier for you to find the answers to your questions. I want to again thank all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing their knowledge with us, and thank you to all of our participants as well. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, we will be not having a webinar on Monday. We will be back again on Thursday, a week from today, April 16th. And then after that, updating everyone as to how we'll be getting answers to your questions. That wraps up our webinar for today. And thanks again. Be safe and be well.